ॐ ज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपा कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरु श्रीयुतापदकमलं श्रीगुरून् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातां सहगना रघुनाथान्वितं तं सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधा कृष्णपदान् सहगना ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितंश्च हे कृष्ण करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधु जगतपते गोपेश गोपिका कांता राधा कांता नमोस्तुते तप्त कांचन गौरंगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये नमो महावदन्याय कृष्णप्रेमप्रदायते कृष्णाय कृष्णचैतन्य नाम्ने गौरत्विषे नमः वाञ्छकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः श्रीकृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैता गदाधार श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृंद हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे. Thank you all so much for joining. So, last two classes, we've covered the first three verses of Srimad Bhagavatam. Today, we will touch on elements of Srila Prabhupada's purport, and we will read up to text number 11, because from text number 4 up to text number 11, this is where Srila's the sages headed by Shaunaka, they're really expressing their eagerness to hear from Sutta Goswami. They're expressing why they want to hear and what they're hoping to get out of hearing from Sutta Goswami. From text 12 onwards, what you see are the specific questions in more detail that the sages are asking Sutta Goswami. So that second part of the chapter, so from text 12 up to I think it's text 23, we will cover next week along with Srila Prabhupada's purports. So did everyone get a chance to read through Srila Prabhupada's purports for 1, 2, and 3 over the last couple of weeks? Okay. We will touch on salient elements of Srila Prabhupada's purports. There's a lot that one can talk about, but we will touch on certain salient points, starting with Srila Prabhupada's purport. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Mudhirayet Nashtaprayeshu Vabhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavate Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Naishtiki Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nanda Gopa Kumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Obeisances unto the personality of Godhead. Does everybody have a Srimad Bhagavatam with them at the moment? Please keep your Srimad Bhagavatam open and pen and paper as well if you wish to highlight anything or write anything down. Purport. Obeisances onto the personality of Godhead Vasudeva directly indicate Lord Sri Krishna, who is the divine son of Vasudeva and Devaki. This fact will be more explicitly explained in the text of this work. Srila Vyasadeva asserts herein that Sri Krishna is the original personality of Godhead, and all others are his direct or indirect plenary portions or portions of the portion. So later on in chapter 3, there will be an elaborate explanation of Krishna being that original personality of Godhead. In that verse, Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam. And throughout the text, there will be a very clear explanation in the Srimad Bhagavatam that it is Sri Krishna alone who is that original personality of Godhead. That's what Srila Prabhupada is alluding to here. Srila Jiva Goswami has even more explicitly explained the subject matter in his Krishna Sandarbha. How many of you have heard of this book, Krishna Sandarbha? Okay, so to explain, you have what is known as the 6 Sandarbhas, or compilations of Gaudiya philosophy. Srila Jiva Goswami has, learning from Srila Rupa and Sanatan Goswami, had taken some notes that were compiled by Srila Gopala Bhatta Goswami. Some of these notes were in order, some of them were out of order. Srila Jiva Goswami has arranged it, completed it, and expressed the Gaudiya Vaishnava philosophy in its entirety in the form of 6 Sandarbhas. So the first Sandarbha is known as the Tattva Sandarbha. Here, Srila Jiva Goswami establishes the most important source of knowledge that the Gaudiya Vaishnavas rely on. In the Tattva Sandarbha, Srila Jiva Goswami, because the fundamental question has to be, how do you know what you know? What do you rely on for your information? Do you rely on Google? Do you rely on Wikipedia? Do you rely on Shastra generally, like different Shastras? Do you rely on what your elders tell you? So there are many different sources of knowledge, and you ask somebody, what do you rely on? You will get a range of different answers. So in the Tattva Sandarbha, Srila Jiva Goswami starts by presenting 10 sources of evidence, a combination of which are accepted by different people. And he explains that out of these 10 different sources, all of these 10 can be collapsed into 3. Does anybody know what those 3 are? Anybody? It's in the beginning of Ishopanishad.
Pratyaksha, Anuman,
Anuman, and
Shabda,
Shabda Praman.
Pramana.
Pratyaksha is that which is sensory knowledge, directly experienced. Pratyaksha. Anuman is that which is inferred through either deduction or induction. You don't directly see it. You see somebody walking into a restaurant and you see them walking outside. You've not seen what they've done inside, but the inference is that they have eaten something there. So that's Anuman. And then Shabda Praman is reliance on Shastra. So Srila Jiva Goswami does not elaborately explain why Shastra is the most important Praman, but taking on the arguments presented by Sri Ramanuja or Sri Madhvacharya, who have already established these points, he presents that point in summary. In the Tattva Sandarbha, though, Srila Jiva Goswami's primary presentation, and this is the unique contribution of the Gaudiya philosophy, is to explain the primacy of Srimad Bhagavatam. And that is the focus of Tattva Sandarbha. So in Tattva Sandarbha, there are 2 parts. There's the Pramana Khanda section or Pramana section, and there's the Prameya section. In the Pramana section, Srila Jiva Goswami explains why Srimad Bhagavatam is the primary source of evidence that we used. And then Srila Jiva Goswami in the second section of Tattva Sandarbha explains the main themes or the main orientation of Srimad Bhagavatam. And so through the Sandarbha, one very clearly gets this understanding that if at all there is a pramana to be followed, it is the Srimad Bhagavatam. So that is the principal point of the Tattva Sandarbha. Once this etymological foundation has been, not etymological, epistemological foundation has been described by Srila Jiva Goswami, the next three Sandarbhas, which are the Bhagavat Sandarbha, Paramatma Sandarbha, and Krishna Sandarbha, they explain knowledge of our relationship with Krishna, our relationship with the material world, the relationship of the material world with Krishna. So the Bhagavat Sandarbha, in particular, briefly describes the Brahman feature of the Lord, but then elaborately describes the Bhagavan feature of the Lord. And then in Paramatma Sandarbha, Krishna's plenary portion, Paramatma, and his various energies, his activities are described. Paramatma Sandarbha is also known for describing the relationship of the jiva, of the material energy, including time, with Krishna, because that's Paramatma's main function, which is to deal with the material world. Now, after Bhagavat Sandarbha and Paramatma Sandarbha have been written, Srila Jiva Goswami wants to explain who that original personality of Godhead is. And that's where Krishna Sandarbha comes. So Srila Prabhupada here writes, Srila Jiva Goswami has more explicitly explained the subject matter in his Krishna Sandarbha. What Srila Prabhupada is saying is that in this Krishna Sandarbha, Srila Jiva Goswami has already explained how the Bhagavan feature of the Lord is the all-inclusive form of the absolute truth, all-inclusive aspect of the absolute truth. And the original form of Bhagavan is Krishna himself. And not just Krishna in Dwaraka or Mathura, but Krishna in Vrindavan in association with Srimati Radharani. This is the topic that is developed in Krishna Sandarbha. The remaining two Sandarbhas are Bhakti Sandarbha and Preeti Sandarbha. In Bhakti Sandarbha, the process of devotional service is elaborately explained. There, Srila Jiva Goswami discusses the 64 limbs of Bhakti. First, 1/3 of that Sandarbha is devoted to explaining how in Srimad Bhagavatam, pure devotional service is described as the essential process. And then for approximately 1/6 of the Sandarbha, the types of devotional service are mentioned: mixed devotional service, pure devotional service. And then finally, in the later part of the Bhakti Sandarbha, the 64 items are described elaborately. And you will see in Srila Prabhupada's Chaitanya Charitamrita, there are many parts of the Bhakti Sandarbha which are elaborately quoted, particularly in sections dealing with deity worship, initiation, or the chanting of Krishna's names. And then finally, you have Preeti Sandarbha. This Preeti Sandarbha establishes the goal. So the first.
Sorry, what is the name? Preeti.
Preeti Sandarbha. So Preeti Sandarbha establishes how Prema Bhakti is the highest Purushartha, or the ultimate goal of a human being, and taken from evidence in Srimad Bhagavatam. So Srila Vyasadeva asserts herein that Sri Krishna is the original personality of Godhead, and all others are his direct or indirect plenary portions or portions of the portion. Srila Jiva Goswami has even more explicitly explained the subject matter in his Krishna Sandarbha. And Brahma, the original living entity, has explained the subject of Sri Krishna substantially in his treatise named Brahma Samhita, with verses like Ishvara Parama Krishna and other such verses. The original
Govinda Madhipurisham.
yes, Govindam Adi Purisham Tamaham Bhajami. The primary form of Krishna has been very clearly established. In the Samaveda Upanishad, it is also stated that Lord Sri Krishna is the divine son of Devaki. Therefore, in this prayer, the first proposition holds, that's Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, that Lord Sri Krishna is the primeval Lord, And if any transcendental nomenclature, that is, if any name at all can be attributed to the absolute truth, this is to be understood as belonging to the absolute personality of Godhead. Is to be understood as belonging to the absolute personality of Godhead. It must be the name indicated by the word Krishna, which means all attractive. What Srila Prabhupada means here has been explained by him in his lectures. What Srila Prabhupada is saying is the primary attribute of the absolute truth is his ability to attract every single living entity. That personality without whom no living entity can live, who sustains, who attracts every living entity by his qualities. And because the primary meaning of Krishna is he who is all attractive, therefore, Krishna is established as that original absolute truth. In Bhagavad Gita, in many places, the Lord asserts himself to be the original personality of Godhead. And this is confirmed by Arjuna and also by great sages like Narada, Vyasa, and many others. In the Padma Purana, it is also stated that out of the innumerable names of the Lord, the name of Krishna is the principal one. Does anybody know which verse that is?
Ete chamsam kalapumsam Krishnastu Bhagavan Swayam.
Is that in Padma Purana?
Oh, sorry. I think it's from Bhagavatam.
Okay. There's a verse that is running around in my mind. I don't know if it's the right one or not. There's a verse along the lines of that chanting 3,000 names of Vishnu is equal to chanting one name of Rama, and 1,000 names of Vishnu is equal to chanting one name of Rama, and chanting 3 names of Rama is identical to chanting one name of Krishna. Does anybody know this verse?
Sri Rama Rama Rameti Rame Rame Manorame Sahasranama Tattulyam Rama Nama Varanane.
That's the first verse. Then what is the second one? That chanting 3 names of Rama is
वही चल रहा है हाँ हाँ नहीं मैंने उनको बताया कि मैं बाद में सुनूंगा तो बोले ठीक है रिकॉर्डिंग भेजती है ना यामिनी हाँ
Sorry, I think Ujjwala Mataji, would you mind? Sorry, just muting the video. There is a verse. I'm not quite sure. I don't quite remember the verse, but I believe that comes from Padma Puran. Vasudeva indicates a plenary portion of the personality of Godhead, and all the different forms of the Lord being identical with Vasudeva are indicated in this text. The name Vasudeva particularly indicates the divine son of Vasudeva and Devaki. Sri Krishna is always meditated upon by the Paramahamsas, who are the perfected ones among those in the renounced order of life. So this is Srila Prabhupada's explanation of that phrase, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. And as we come to chapter 3 of the first canto, we will examine some of the proofs that are provided and to establish that Krishna is that original personality of Godhead. Now, Srila Prabhupada is going to start explaining Janmadi Asya Yataha. Vasudeva, or Lord Shri Krishna, is the cause of all causes. Everything that exists emanates from the Lord. How this is so is explained in later chapters of this work. Going further down, it is natural that a philosophical mind wants to know about the origin of the creation. At night, he sees the stars in the sky and he naturally speculates about their inhabitants. Such inquiries are natural for man because man has a developed consciousness which is higher than that of the animals. The author of the Srimad Bhagvatam gives a direct answer to such inquiries. He says that Lord Sri Krishna is the origin of all creations. I think it is a very natural experience for anybody that when they go outside and they observe the expansiveness of the stars in a very natural environment, when it's very quiet and the mind becomes introspective, it is very natural that people automatically begin to think, this vast universe, there's so many stars. What are they? How far are they? Who has created all this? This is a very natural question. Similarly, when you see milk, normally speaking, it is very natural to ask, where did this come from? But in today's urban society, where the stars are covered by dust or other things, where milk comes from packets in the supermarket, this natural sense of inquisitiveness or introspectiveness to inquire about the ultimate cause of everything is completely dulled. So therefore, sometimes it is said that those who establish themselves in an environment of goodness, away from phones, away from an artificial means of life, their mind naturally becomes introspective and they start inquiring about these subject matters. The other thing that has happened today is that because of two theories which are taught in today's schools, I'm of course talking about the Big Bang Theory and the theory of evolution. Prabhupada had identified these as being fundamental obstacles that block natural human inquiry. Because now you have a theory that says that matter is the source of everything, and the only thing that matters is matter. And people's natural inquiry, this is so vast, this is so wonderful, this is so great. Where did it come from? There must be somebody extremely intelligent behind this. It's the most natural thing that occurs to an introspective mind. But these natural queries are just automatically dulled by these two ideas. And so therefore, Srila Prabhupada was so keen for these ideas to be demolished by well-educated devotees. So Srila Prabhupada continues. The author of Srimad Bhagavatam gives a direct answer to such inquiries. He says that Lord Sri Krishna is the origin of all creations. He is not only the creator of the universe, but the destroyer as well. The manifested cosmic nature is created at a certain period by the will of the Lord. It is maintained for some time, and then it is annihilated by his will. Therefore, the supreme will is behind all cosmic activities. Of course, there are atheists of various categories who do not believe in a creator, but that is due to a poor fund of knowledge. The modern scientist, for example, has created space satellites, and by some arrangement or other, these satellites are thrown into outer space to fly for some time at the control of the scientist who is far away. Similarly, all the universes with innumerable stars and planets are controlled by the intelligence of the personality of Godhead. So this is an argument that Srila Prabhupada would make very often. Sometimes Prabhupada would say, if you see a bomb in a park, the natural question that somebody asks is, who put it there? If you see a wonderful creation, the natural question to ask is, who made it? What is the intelligence of somebody who's made this? So when you see the wondrous nature of creation, and you see how precise it is, how everything fits together so nicely, the most natural deduction is that there is an intelligent, there's a profound intelligence behind this. And that's what Srila Prabhupada is pointing out here. That intelligence of the personality of Godhead is what controls all the innumerable stars and planets and everything else in existence. And then Srila Prabhupada continues, going down into the paragraph beginning in Vedic literatures. So Srila Prabhupada is partially commenting on Tene Brahma Hridaya. In the Vedic literatures, it is said that the absolute truth personality of Godhead is the chief among all living personalities. All living personalities, beginning from the first created being, Brahma, down to the smallest ant, are individual living beings. And above Brahma, there are other living beings with individual capacities. And the personality of Godhead is also a similar living being. And he is an individual as are other living beings. But the Supreme Lord or the Supreme Living Being has the greatest intelligence. And he possesses supermost inconceivable energies of all different varieties. So what Srila Prabhupada is saying is this is what one should understand from that phrase Janmadi Asyataha and Tene Brahma Hridaya Adi Kavaye, that the Lord is able to inspire our intelligence with these ideas. You think about a scientist like Ramanujan, who, without working through proofs, was able to intuitively write out complex mathematical theorems and was intuitively able to say that this is correct. Now, this is the function of inspiration. It's not the process of electrical impulses kind of working its way to a solution, or an algorithm which mechanically produces a solution. It's an inspiration. And this idea of inspiration is the biggest challenge that defeats the idea of evolution. This idea of inspiration or intuition is something which defeats the idea that we are just made out of matter, because there is no material explanation for intuition, for inspiration. So what Srila Prabhupada is saying is, from this idea of being inspired, of intuitively getting outcomes, and by perceiving the intelligence of creation, one should infer that supremely intelligent conscious being, who is, because of how vast creation is and how perfectly it's in order, must be filled with the qualities of omnipresence, omnipotence, etc. Unscrupulous persons, going to the next paragraph, go immediately to the 10th canto, and especially to the 5 chapters which describe the Lord's rasa dance. This portion of the Srimad Bhagvatam is the most confidential part of this great literature. Unless one is thoroughly accomplished in the transcendental knowledge of the Lord, which is understood by understanding Krishna's relationship with the material world and Krishna's relationship with the devotees in the material world. So even in the 2nd canto, Srila Prabhupada says that topics of Krishna Lila have to begin with Krishna's pastimes as it deals with spawning the material world, because this gives one a very clear understanding of the Achintya Shakti of the Lord, of his transcendental nature. Unless one is thoroughly accomplished in the transcendental knowledge of the Lord, one is sure to misunderstand the Lord's worshipful transcendental pastimes called rasa dance and his love affairs with the gopis. Srila Vyasadeva, going further down, therefore gives the reader the chance to gradually develop spiritual realization before actually relishing the essence of the pastimes of the Lord, by elaborately in the Srimad Bhagavatam describing Janmadi Asyataha Tene Brahma Hridaya Adi Kavaye. In the first 2, 3, 4, 5 cantos, you will see these points elaborately explained and described. Gives the reader the chance to gradually develop spiritual realization. Therefore, he purposely invokes a Gayatri mantra, Dhimahi. This Gayatri mantra is meant for spiritually advanced people. When one is successful in chanting the Gayatri mantra, he can enter into the transcendental position of the Lord. Because the essence of the word Dhimahi is to worship the Lord in devotional service, devoid of any material desires, devoid of any desires other than to serve him. And so when one engages in this transcendental devotional service, knowledge of Krishna is revealed in the heart. So that's why Prabhupada is connecting this idea of developing spiritual realization to the phrase Dhimahi. The Srimad Bhagavatam systematically develops our understanding of Krishna so that we can become, through hearing, can become absorbed in remembering him, can become absorbed in chanting his glories. Develop an understanding, therefore, by this process of hearing and chanting, realization of Krishna's transcendental position, and thereby come to understand Krishna's transcendental pastimes in the 10th canto. Prabhupada says, when one is successful in chanting the Gayatri mantra, he can enter into the transcendental position of the Lord. One must therefore acquire Brahminical qualities or be perfectly situated in the mode of goodness in order to chant the Gayatri mantra successfully, and then attain to the stage of transcendently realizing the Lord, his name, his fame, and his qualities, and so on. So then Srila Prabhupada begins to describe Tejo Vari Mridam Yata Vinimayo. Srimad Bhagvatam is the narration of the Swarupa of the Lord manifested by his internal potency, Dhamna Svena. This potency is distinguished from the external potency, which is manifested in the cosmic world, Sada Nirasta Kuhakam, which is within our experience. Srila Vyasadeva makes a clear distinction between the two in this shloka. Srila Vyasadeva says herein that the manifested internal potency is real, Dhamna Svena, whereas the external manifested energy in the form of material existence is only temporary. What is a Sanskrit word that describes temporary?
Ashashvatam.
In this verse, Janmadi Asyata. In the third line of the verse.
Amrisha?
Mrisha. Mrisha means unreal. Amrisha means real. Thank you, Mataji. Whereas the external manifested energy in the form of material existence is only temporary and illusory, like the mirage in the desert. So now Srila Prabhupada is explaining that analogy, Tejo Vari Mridam. In the desert, mirage, there's no actual water. There's only the appearance of water. Real water is somewhere else. The manifested cosmic creation appears as reality, but reality of which this is but a shadow is in the spiritual world. Absolute truth is in the spiritual sky, not in the material sky. Further down, Srila Prabhupada is now going to explain Anvayad Itaratas. The chief engineer of a complicated construction does not personally take part in the construction, but he knows every nook and corner because everything is done under his direction. So this is Itaratas. He knows everything about the construction both directly, which is Anvayad, and indirectly, Itaratas. Similarly, the personality of Godhead, who is the supreme engineer of this cosmic creation, knows every nook and corner, although affairs are being carried out by demigods. Beginning from Brahma down to the insignificant ant, no one is independent in the material creation. The hand of the Lord is seen everywhere. Towards the end of that paragraph, he is compared to a mine of gold, and the cosmic creations in so many different forms are compared to objects made from the gold, such as gold rings, necklaces, and so on. The gold ring and gold necklace are qualitatively one with the gold in the mine, but quantitatively the gold in the mine is different. Therefore, the absolute truth is simultaneously one and different. Nothing is absolutely equal with the absolute truth, but at the same time, nothing is independent of the absolute truth. So this explains the foundational concept that we spoke of, that Krishna is both the material cause, because he himself expands as this material world, but at the same time, he continues to remain separate. So in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, you have these examples. Just as you understand gold ornaments by understanding a lump of gold, just as you understand items made from clay by understanding the element clay, similarly, this entire material world can be understood in its proper perspective by understanding the original source behind everything, who expands himself as everything. So that's the example that Srila Prabhupada is bringing out here. Krishna, as he expands himself as his energies into this whole world, because he's non-different to his energies. His energies really, we gave this example when you talk about a spark or when you talk about heat, you cannot speak of the heat as being separate from the fire, because the heat is an attribute of fire. So you have to say the fire is making me warm, but it's not exactly the fire, it's the fire qualified as its potency heat is making me warm. So by this example, one can understand how Krishna directly, because it's Krishna himself, he's Satyam, he is everything in this world. He is directly making us warm. And at the same time, he is indirectly, through his energies, making us warm. That's the idea being established here. And this is the foundation behind the philosophical term that we use, Beda Abeda, Achintya Beda Abeda Tattva. And this idea of Satyam is the philosophical foundation of the entire Srimad Bhagavatam. In the Shruti mantra, skipping one paragraph, in the Shruti mantra, it is also stated that the absolute whole of Brahman is the ultimate source of everything. So this is the Shruti mantra is in the Taittiriya Upanishad. Yato va imani bhutani jayante yena jatani jivanti. And this mantra is quoted in certain purports that Srila Prabhupada has given. You will see it in the Bhagavad Gita, for example. But that's the basis Prabhupada is saying for the phrase Janmadiyasya yataha. In the Smriti mantra, here in Srimad Bhagavatam, the same is confirmed. It is said that the source from which everything emanates at the beginning of Brahma's millennium and the reservoir to which everything ultimately enters is the absolute truth of Brahman. Further down, Srila Prabhupada says, in this sloka, the particular words Abhigya and Swarat are significant. These two words distinguish the Supreme Lord from all the other living entities. No other living entity is either Abhigya or Swarat. That is, no one is either fully cognizant or fully independent. The word Abhigya differentiates the absolute truth actually from matter as well, because matter is dead. Just like we gave the example of Sankhya, which uses the example of scorpions being born from grains of rice. You may have heard of this example. So they use this example to say how life can come from matter. Srila Vyasadeva refutes this by using the word abhigya. And Srila Prabhupada explains the word abhigya in its full sense also distinguishes the Lord from living entities because the Lord is possessed of complete knowledge or complete consciousness. And this is also explained in Bhagavad Gita, Kshetragyam chapi mam vidhi sarva kshetreshu bharata. The jivas are familiar with one kshetra, one body, but the Lord is familiar with everything and everybody. And Swarat. So Srila Prabhupada says the living entity is not fully independent. Even Brahma has to meditate upon the Supreme Lord in order to create. Then what to speak of great scientists like Einstein? Further down, even Mayavadi impersonalists who flatter themselves that they can become one with the Lord are neither Abhigya nor Swarat. Such impersonalists undergo severe austerities or acquire knowledge to become one with the Lord, meaning that the Lord is distinguished even from those who are striving to be liberated or liberated souls. Going to the next page. Some Mayavadi scholars argue that Srimad Bhagavatam was not compiled by Srila Vyasadeva, and some of them suggest that this book is a modern creation written by someone named Vopadeva. Vopadeva, I believe, was a 14th or 15th century author, and so some say that it was written by him. In order to refute such meaningless arguments, Srila Sridhar Swami points out that there's reference to the Bhagavatam in many of the oldest Puranas. And in our first class, we made reference to Lord Chaitanya quoting the Garuda Purana. This is in Chaitanya Charitamrita. And it is also in the Matsya Purana, which is the oldest of all the Puranas. This first sloka of the Bhagavatam begins with the Gayatri mantra, Dhimahi. There is reference to this in the Matsya Purana, Yatra Adritya Gayatrim. It is founded on the Gayatri mantra. Here's the statement there. In that Purana, it is said with reference to the Gayatri mantra in the Bhagavatam that there are many narrations of spiritual instructions beginning with the Gayatri mantra. And there's the history of Vritrasura. So in that same verse, it says this Srimad Bhagavatam is in that oldest Purana, which references the Srimad Bhagavatam in its full structure, 12 cantos, 18,000 verses, thus establishing the antiquity of the Srimad Bhagavatam. It is stated that it is based on the Gayatri Mantra. It gives transcendental instructions, and it quotes specifically the instructions of the Dichi to the Ashwini Kumaras, which is given in the 6th canto Bhagavatam. And what is described there is a Narayana Kavacha, plus other spiritual instructions. And there's the history of Vritrasura. It is very interesting that the Vritrasura pastime, among all the devotees in the Srimad Bhagavatam, is that identification mark of Srimad Bhagavatam. Just like sometimes you have a Shaligram Shila, and then you can say if you have Sudarshan chakras in the mouth, you say this is Nrsingadev. Or you have the sign of a bow, you say this is Sri Ramachandra. Or you have a cow's hoof print, you say this is a Krishna Shila. So like this, these are the identification marks of Srimad Bhagavatam. And one of the identification marks is that literature in which the pastime of Vritrasura is described. Because throughout all the scriptures, Vritrasura was known as one of the greatest devotees. And by indicating the name of Vritrasura, what is actually indicated is that the Srimad Bhagavatam is founded on describing the Lord and the greatest devotees like Vritrasura. So that is the indication or the lakshana or the symbol that is used to describe Srimad Bhagavatam. Anyone, and this is continuing the translation of that verse, anyone who makes a gift of this great work on a full moon day attains to the highest perfection of life by returning to Godhead. Actually, the verse says anybody who makes a gift of the Srimad Bhagavatam with the insignia of a lion stamped on the cover, they return back home, back to Godhead, meaning that this is the king of all scriptures. That's the idea. There is reference to the Bhagavatam in other Puranas also, where it is clearly stated that this work was finished in 12 cantos, which include 18,000 verses. In the Padma Puran, also there's a reference to the Bhagavatam in a conversation between Gautama and Maharaj Ambarish. So this proof that Srila Prabhupada is providing, I'll read the next sentence. The king was advised therein to read regularly Srimad Bhagavatam if he desired liberation from material bondage. So the fact that Srimad Bhagavatam has been referenced in the oldest Puranas, and ancient kings like Ambarish Maharaj and sages like Gautama were aware of the Srimad Bhagavatam in its full structure, 18,000 verses, 12 cantos, indicates that Srimad Bhagavatam, one, is not just it is not just not a new creation. It is an ancient literature that has eternally been in existence, sometimes manifest, sometimes unmanifest. That's the point that Srila Prabhupada is making. And if there is at all any doubt that anybody raises, one should be quite familiar with these references, because this is the substantiation that our acharyas have given to explain the eternality and antiquity of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And it also explains why the Srimad Bhagavatam is so great in comparison to every other literature. So Srila Prabhupada continues, under the circumstances, there is no doubt about the authority of the Bhagavatam. Within the past 500 years, many erudite scholars and acharyas like Jiva Goswami, Sanatan Goswami, Vishwanath Chakravarti, Vallabhacharya, and many of the distinguished scholars, even after the time of Lord Chaitanya, made elaborate commentaries on the Srimad Bhagavatam. And the serious student would do well to attempt to go through them in order to better relish the transcendental messages. The oldest extant commentary that we have is Srila Sridhar Swami's commentary. Therefore, Lord Chaitanya says that it is due to the mercy of Srila Sridhar Swami that the meaning of Srimad Bhagavatam is still known to us. In his Tattva Sandarbha, Srila Jiva Goswami quotes a whole list of commentaries. Now, most of them are not in existence any longer. But it's also interesting to note that even though traditionally we align ourselves to the Madhva line, so coming from Madhvacharya, skipping a few, but Jaya Tirtha, Vyasa Tirtha, Akshobhya Tirtha, I think is the next one. Then we go to Madhavendra Puri. So this is traditionally the line that we quote. But actually our actual parampara is the parampara of Srimad Bhagavatam. So our alliance in terms of philosophy much more closely reflects what what the Srimad Bhagavatam says, which is as it is explained by Srila Sridhar Swami. And Sridhar Swami, it is understood, was a descendant of the Vishnu Swami Sampradaya. There's no other literature that describes Vishnu Swami's own opinion except for Sridhar Swami. This is the only thing we know about his philosophy. Later on, Vallabhacharya redefined that Pushti Marg line. But our lineage actually comes from Sridhar Swami and exalted personalities like Jayadev Goswami and Bilva Mangal Thakur, who were able to bring out the essence of the Srimad Bhagavatam. And it is the greatest gift of the Gaudiya line not to establish just theism, because Ramanuja and Madhvacharya had very clearly established theism itself in their Vedanta Sutra commentaries. Srila Jiva Goswami and Lord Chaitanya, they rely upon the evidence provided by these acharyas to establish Krishna consciousness as a foundation. But it is the Gaudiya Vaishnava's unique contribution to the world that the glory of Srimad Bhagavatam, its explanations, its depth, its sweetness, has been fully brought out in a way that devotees and anybody can relish its message. That is the most important contribution of the Gaudiya philosophy. And so Srila Prabhupada, and among the commentaries that are available, the one and only end-to-end commentary that we have in existence, apart from Sridhar Swami. So Sridhar Swami's commentary is there. The only one end-to-end commentary that we were given was Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur within the Gaudiya line. And of course, now by Srila Prabhupada's mercy, his own end-to-end commentary. But Srila Jiva Goswami has written many books. Practically every book that we have can be seen as a commentary on Srimad Bhagavatam. Whether you take Bhakti Rasamrit Sindhu, whether you take Ujjvala Nilamani, Srila Jiva Goswami's Shat Sandarbhas, Brihad Bhagavatamrita, Laghu Bhagavatamrita, the various poems written by the Goswamis, Stavamala, Krishna Lila Stava, all of these things are commentaries on the Srimad Bhagavatam. Srila Jiva Goswami and Sanatan Goswami also wrote a commentary on the 10th canto Bhagavatam, Vaishnava Toshani, Brihad Vaishnava Toshani. But every book that our acharyas have written actually ultimately references the Srimad Bhagavatam. So from this, you can understand that our actual lineage is the lineage of Srimad Bhagavatam. And those who understand Srimad Bhagavatam really well, deeply, really are able to have a solid grounding in Gaudiya philosophy and Gaudiya Vaishnava practices. So those are the points I wish to highlight from Srila Prabhupada's purport, the text number 1. Can we have just 2 minutes of questions here?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Prabhu, you mentioned this 6 sandarbhas, right?
Yes.
Those where we get, whichever you mention, where is the source? Like, what is the book or any reference to it?
Bhanu Maharaj has translated it, but you will find it very difficult to understand without preparation. The reason is not because it is esoteric. The reason is it requires a grounding in underlying sources. For example, you need to be quite familiar with the 10 principal Upanishads. You need to be reasonably familiar with at least the foundations of Vedanta Sutra and their associated commentaries by Ramanuja, some by Madhvacharya. There is a level of familiarity with these texts that's required before studying the Sat Sandarbhas. So you will find it, so therefore our focus will actually be Srila Prabhupada's purports, because when one deeply understands Srila Prabhupada's purports, then by Srila Prabhupada's mercy, one may have access to what the acharyas have written. And everything has been given in Srila Prabhupada's books.
Prabhu, I was just asking, whichever you related, like, Tattva Sandarbha, Bhagavad Sandarbha, so what it indicates, like what it signifies. So that information, where should I find that? Because
You can just find it on Google.
Google only.
Just type in Shat Sandarbhas. There will be articles and things that people have written.
Okay, okay. Thank
Sorry,
you.
can I ask one question, please, Abhishek Prabhu?
Just 1 second. I think Sridhar Prabhu has raised his hand. Sridhar Prabhu?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dhanotram. Prabhu, here in this purport, we find it like Ambarish Maharaj with Gautama, sage Gautama, are discussed about this Srimad Bhagavatam. That means they are ancient, not in this yuga.
No.
The Srimad Bhagavatam is written by Vyasadev in the Dwapar Yuga, and Ambarish Maharaj is not belongs to this one.
No.
And how
Srimad Bhagavatam is an eternal literature. And so when it speaks about Ambarish Maharaj, it it gave Shankaracharya's explanation of this. When the Vedas say Gautama said, it doesn't mean that Gautama himself came before the Vedas. What it means is that the Vedas are a blueprint from which the whole creation is made. Do you understand? It's like a photo negative from which many copies of the photo can be made. So the Srimad Bhagavatam references Ambarish Maharaj. It means that a personality with that devotional attitude called Ambarish is created, who represents or who characterizes the Ambarish Maharaj personality in the Srimad Bhagavatam, who's very attached to hearing the glories of the Lord as described in Srimad Bhagavatam. So therefore we say that Srimad Bhagavatam is our Paurashaya. It is not compiled, it is not composed, it is compiled, but it is not composed by any human being. Thank you, Prabhuji. Rati Mataji?
Thank you. So Srila Sridhara Swami, he first of all compiled the complete Srimad Bhagavatam. So he was the first guy.
No, he didn't compile it. He wrote the earliest extant commentary on the Srimad Bhagavatam, known as Bhavarta Deepika. Actually, Srila Prabhupada's word-for-word translations, they come from Srila Sridhar Swami. And his translations, they're based on Sridhar Swami as well. Srila Prabhupada's purports are very often based on Srila Sridhar, because Srila Prabhupada's purports were based on Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's commentaries, who himself based his commentaries on Srila Sridhar Swami. So very often you will see Sridhar Swami's presentation, and then Srila Prabhupada will explain how it applies to us or how we should seek to understand it for our own practice.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Mataji. Okay, let's go on to text number 2. Srila Prabhupada's purport. Religion includes 4 primary subjects, namely, so this is explaining Dharma Projita Kaitavottara. Religion includes 4 primary subjects, namely pious activities, economic development, satisfaction of the senses, and finally liberation from material bondage. Irreligious life is a barbarous condition. So in the Vedas, you have, there's a question that's asked. You'll see this in the 11th canto. Why, if karma ultimately binds a living entity, why is karma spoken about at all in the scriptures? And the answer is given that if people did not have their hands and legs tied by prescribed duties, then they would very quickly lead an unregulated life. If I didn't have to, and sometimes we ask ourselves this question, why is it so hard? If I'm married, if I have a child, then morning I have to get up. Cleaning the house takes 4 or 5 hours a day. Taking care of the child takes another 4 or 5 hours. Why is life so hard? Why do I need to work another 6, 7, 8 hours just to eat some prasadam, have a decent place to live, and just live like this? The answer is that if this is a specific direct arrangement by the Lord, and because an idle mind is a devil's workshop, if we had no responsibilities and everything was handed to us on a platter, then our go-to instinct would be to get up in the morning, scroll through our phone, answer messages, watch things on YouTube, gradually get up, eat breakfast in bed, or eat whatever we liked, not take bath. So this is an animalistic way of existence. And the Vedas specifically structure our life so that we become so busy and absorbed in our prescribed duties that we become regulated, disciplined, we learn to sacrifice. All of these qualities bring us to our actual true nature. And when this is seen as service to Krishna, prescribed duties in service to Krishna is called dharma. That is the actual definition of dharma in the scriptures. There's another definition which refers to Sanatan Dharma. That's a separate topic. But dharma in the scriptures refers to that regulated, prescribed life offered to Krishna for his pleasure. And from there comes artha, kama, and moksha. So Prabhupada says religion includes 4 primary subjects. Whenever you go to any scripture in the world, you could call it Quran, you could call it Bible, you could call it the Vedas. There are always do's and don'ts. If you look at the Torah, for example, there are, and I don't remember the numbers, something like 348 do's, 200 and something don'ts. And you can imagine how much effort it takes for a sincere practitioner to go through and follow all those do's and don'ts. It's because, as Prabhupada says, religion includes 4 primary subjects, namely dharma, which Prabhupada calls pious activities, following the prescriptions of do's and don'ts. Eat this, don't eat this. As a husband, as a wife, as a brahmana, kshatriya, vaishya, these are your duties. If you don't do this, you suffer sin. And this is what the Yamadutas speak to Ajamil. If you ever want to know what dharma is, as described in the Vedas, you can read that first chapter of the 6th canto of Srimad Bhagvatam, where the Yamadutas elaborately explain what dharma is. And from that, when one engages in prescribed duties, following the directions of the scriptures, then one naturally gets economic development, artha, because that is the consequence of satisfying the order of the Lord. And then kama, one enjoys one's senses, satisfaction of the senses. So therefore, in every scripture, you will see a regular prescription. If you do this, you will get this. You follow Ekadasi. Here is an example of the wealth, the fame, the heavenly destination that somebody has gotten. You fight for the Lord, the Quran says, you enter Swarga with certain benefits. So Prabhupada says religion, regardless of its name, concerns itself with these 4 primary subjects, and finally, liberation from material bondage. Because irreligious life is a barbarous condition. It is an animalistic condition. Human life, Prabhupada says, begins when religion begins. Eating, sleeping, fearing, defending, because the essence of defense is a fear. I'll be out on the street. And mating are the 4 principles of animal life. These are common both to the animals and to human beings, but religion is the extra function of the human being. Without religion, human life is no better than animal life. Therefore, in human societies, when there is some form of religion which aims at self-realization and which makes reference to man's eternal relationship with God. What you very often see with Srila Prabhupada's purports is that Srila Prabhupada, to introduce Srimad Bhagavatam's idea of dharma projita kaitavotra, that Srimad Bhagavatam throws out all cheating religion, he begins to systematically explain from the beginning what religion is. Because today, most people don't understand religion. So then how will they understand what the distinction between what is inferior religion and superior religion? Similarly, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, when the Srimad Bhagavatam speaks about detachment, people don't even understand the first thing of what attachment means, because attachment means sacrifice. People have to learn to live for someone other than themselves to learn what real detachment means. When we come without an idea of attachment, without an idea of service, without an idea of duty, detachment is perceived as, I don't care, I don't need to worry. And this is very much a Western trained mindset that comes with these ideas. But a pious mindset from either East or West is this idea of attachment being necessary, being good to develop, to evolve as a person. And then when one has evolved to the point where one no longer needs to be attached, Srimad Bhagavatam speaks about detachment. So introducing these ideas, Srila Prabhupada is building his points. So Srila Prabhupada continues, in the lower stages of human civilization, there is always competition to lord it over material nature. Driven by such consciousness, man turns to religion. He thus performs pious activities or religious functions in order to gain something material. So now Srila Prabhupada is going to explain kaitava, or cheating religion. But if such material gains are obtainable in other ways, then so-called religion is neglected. This is the situation in modern civilization. Man is thriving economically, so at present, he's not very interested in religion. So what Srila Prabhupada says is that these forms of religion are cheating religions because somebody's only interested in God to the extent that they get what they want. If religion in its true sense means a relationship with God, because even prescribed duties are instructions of the Lord, performed for the pleasure of the Lord. But if the purpose of doing this is something that you want for yourself, it's not a true relationship with the Lord. And so it's called cheating religion. You are cheating, you are entering the relationship with a mood of cheating, duplicity. I'm in it because I want something from it. Prabhupada continues, man is thriving economically, so at present he is not very interested in religion. Churches, mosques, or temples are now practically vacant. Men are more interested in factories, shops, and cinemas than in religious places, which were erected by their forefathers. And you can really see this in Sydney. There are such beautiful churches. If you come to the city, right near Wynyard Station, right close to, what's that place? Hyde Park, opposite Hyde Park. There are extremely beautiful churches. And apart from the busy life that you see around, you see hardly anybody actually inside the complex. This practically proves that religion is performed for some economic gains. Economic gains are needed for sense gratification. Often, when one is baffled in the pursuit of sense gratification, he takes to salvation and tries to become one with the Supreme Lord. Consequently, all these states are simply different types of sense gratification. They're cheating religions. In the Vedas, the above mentioned four activities are prescribed in the regulative way so that there will not be any undue competition for sense gratification. But Srimad Bhagvatam is transcendental to all these sense gratificatory activities. It is, Prabhupada is going to explain, Paramo Nirmatsaranam Satam. It is purely transcendental literature which can be understood by the pure devotees of the Lord who are transcendental to competitive sense gratification. So Prabhupada emphasizes this idea of competitive sense gratification because the essence of somebody who is envious is somebody who's addicted to sense pleasure. The moment you're addicted to sense pleasure, so matsara, envious, is the foundation is somebody who's addicted to sense pleasure. And because of that addiction to sense pleasure, one begins to compare, one begins to dislike those who have something better than us, or who do better than us. And on the contrary, one feels a sense of pride when one is better than others. The heart of this is envy. When we cannot control our situation and we resent the others having more control over their life or control over us, that's envy. So sometimes Prabhupada also said that the eating of animals is founded on envy, because it's founded on it's based on this desire for sense gratification, and it is based on this idea of controlling things for our own benefit. And when we are not able to do so, it is based, there is a feeling of dislike, of hatred towards that other object or entity. And so therefore meat eating, Prabhupada says, is a reflection of one's envy towards animals. But the moment somebody stops running into this rat race of, I want to enjoy in this world, at that point, he stops feeling envious of anybody else. And so therefore, somebody who has finished with the material world, they're called nirmatsara, or somebody who's truly non-envious. And parama nirmatsara, they are so self-satisfied in a connection, in relationship with Krishna, that they, no matter what anybody else has, it doesn't affect them. Others' happiness becomes their happiness, and others' sadness becomes their sadness. People, therefore, who have stopped trying to enjoy this world are able to appreciate the message of Srimad Bhagavatam. And therefore, you can see how many times here in this purport, Srila Prabhupada repeatedly emphasizes competition, this desire to fight with others for resources. So Srila Prabhupada says, it is purely transcendental literature which can be understood only by the pure devotees of the Lord who are transcendental to competitive sense gratification. And that's an explanation of nirmatsara. In the material world, there's keen competition between animal and animal, man and man, community and community, nation and nation. This is the defining characteristic of the material world. So therefore, competition, pride, or the desire for sense gratification, attachment, pride, envy, all of these things together define what material existence is like. And Prabhupada says, but the devotees of the Lord rise above such competitions. They do not compete with the materialists because they are on the path back to Godhead, where life is eternal and blissful. Such transcendentalists are non-envious and pure in heart. The next paragraph. Now Srila Prabhupada is going to explain why Srimad Bhagavatam is the supremely great literature. This section is actually taken from Srila Jiva Goswami's explanation. The impersonal aspect of the absolute truth is not the highest. Above the impersonal feature is the Paramatma feature, and above this is the personal feature of the absolute truth, or Bhagavan. This is an introductory statement. Srimad Bhagavatam gives information about the absolute truth in his personal feature. Vedyam Vastavam Atra Vastu. So Prabhupada is saying the Srimad Bhagavatam focuses on the Vastavam Vastu, the actual underlying absolute truth, the only thing that is truly existing. Jo vastavikta mein vastu hai. You say it in Hindi. It is higher than impersonal literatures because tapatrayon mulanam, we discussed this, it uproots suffering from its very root, whereas impersonal literatures can only pacify on the surface one's material desires, and higher than the Jnana Kanda section of the Vedas. It is even higher than the Karma Kanda division and even higher than the Upasana Kanda division, because the Karma Kanda and Upasana Kanda, these sections focus on people who have material desires. So it comes to that first line. So the first part of what Srila Prabhupada says, that it is superior to the Jnana Kanda section of the Vedas. This is an explanation of that second line of the verse. Vedyam vastavam atra vastu shivadam tapatrayan mulanam. Because it speaks about the absolute truth as being that personality of Godhead and uproots our miseries from the very bottom, it is superior to the impersonal literatures. because it's a literature that rises above the competition, the envy that defines the material world, it is higher than the Karma Kanda and Jnana Kanda division of the scriptures. And Prabhupada is going to explain this. In Karma Kanda, there's competition to reach heavenly planets for better sense gratification. And there's similar competition in the Jnana Kanda and the Upasana Kanda. The Srimad Bhagavatam is superior to all of these because it aims at the supreme truth, which is a substance or the root of all categories. Vedyam Vastavam Atra Vastu. So that's Srila Prabhupada's explanation of Vastavam Vastu. From Srimad Bhagavatam, one can come to know the substance as well as the categories. Substance meaning what is the Vastavam Vastu, and then what are the categories, what are the elements that depend on this Vastavam Vastu. So that's defined as the categories. So give me a second. Two. There we are. Sorry, I was only able to see one or two devotees previously. The substance, end of that paragraph, is the absolute truth, the supreme Lord, and all emanations are relative forms of his energy. Srila Prabhupada is going to explain the Vastavam Vastu again, which is synonymous with the phrase Satyam from the first verse. Nothing is apart from the substance. Again, Vastavam Vastu. But at the same time, the energies are different from the substance. This conception is not contradictory. Srimad Bhagavatam explicitly promulgates the simultaneous one and different philosophy of the Vedanta Sutra, which begins with the Janmadi Asya Sutra. This knowledge that the energy of the Lord is simultaneously one with and different from the Lord is an answer to the mental speculator's attempt to establish the energy as the absolute. When this knowledge is factually understood, one sees the conceptions of monism and dualism to be imperfect. So what Srila Prabhupada means here to say is that among the whole range of philosophies that exist in this world, there are some philosophies on one end of the spectrum that say everything is illusion, there's only one eternal real substance. This actually characterizes philosophies like, in the Vedic sense, the Mayavad philosophy, but then you also see elements of this in the Buddhist philosophy, in the Jain philosophy, and in other philosophies that predominate in Western philosophical ideas. And on the other end of the spectrum, you see dualism. So if you think of in the Vedic sense, the Vaisheshika philosophy, the Vaisheshika philosophy is an interesting one because in the Vaisheshika philosophy, you have this idea that you have individual atomic substances. So they do not accept the idea that you have Pradhan, from which evolves Mahat Tattva, Ahankara, and then those underlying categories. They just think that you have all of these elements which are separate, and then they combine by some force to produce these categories. So this is dualism in its full sense. There are others who think similar to the oneness idea that you have everything is one. Like, for example, in modern physics, you have this idea that matter is ultimately a form of energy, and energy is a form of matter. So ultimately, you just have energy. In the Vedic sense, you have this idea of Shakti. Those who worship Shakti, Mother Durga, they have this idea that from energy spans this entire world. So there are some people who focus entirely on the energy aspect of creation. There are some who say all of this is illusion. There's just one underlying reality that defines all of existence. But the combination of the two, understanding that the absolute truth is the personality of Godhead who's filled with unlimited energies, who's non-different to his energies, who, by virtue of his energies, expands himself in himself, which is this world, and expands himself as everything that fills this world, simultaneously and perfectly encapsulates this idea of oneness and difference at the same time. And it is because there are, if you philosophically examine this, and we won't do this now, but as we study the Srimad Bhagavatam, we will see the faults that exist with this idea of absolute oneness. There are logical difficulties that are not possible to surmount. Similarly, there are logical inconsistencies and difficulties with this idea of everything being different. But this unified idea that everything is ultimately one, but filled with variety and energies, is that perfect philosophy that reconciles and explains all of reality as we see it. And so that's what Srila Prabhupada is pointing out. With this knowledge factually understood, one sees the conceptions of monism and dualism to be imperfect. Development of this transcendental consciousness grounded in the conception of simultaneously one and different leads one immediately to the stage of freedom from the threefold miseries. Srimad Bhagavatam begins with the surrender of the devotee onto the absolute person. This is a very interesting statement. What does Srila Prabhupada means by this? What does Srila Prabhupada mean by this? The devotee is fully aware that he is one with the absolute, and at the same time in the eternal position of servant to the absolute. So you see this in the statement of a devotee like Ramananda Rai, when he says, "My dear Lord, I am but an instrument. I speak what you cause me to speak. You are present in my heart. You are dancing on my tongue. And as you move my tongue, I speak." Or I'm like a puppet and you pull the strings and I dance as you make me dance. Srila Prabhupada also expressed this when in that famous song, "My dear Lord, you brought me here to dance. Now make me dance as you like. My name is Bhakti Vedanta. I have neither Bhakti nor Vedanta, but I have strong faith in the holy names. If you desire, you can now fulfill the purport of my name of Bhakti Vedanta." In the greatest devotees, there is such a strong conception that there's no idea of their being separate from the Lord. They are one with the Lord in that sense. They cannot see themselves as being separate. They always say, "I'm just acting as an instrument of Krishna's grace. Krishna's making me dance. Krishna made me think this. Krishna has kindly given this facility. Krishna has kindly given this energy. Prabhu, Krishna has inspired you in this way." They cannot think separately from Krishna. But at the same time, it's very clear that they're using the phrases, "Krishna has inspired me. Krishna is making me dance." So it is not simply like an inanimate object, which is just speaking, but there's this eternal conception of identity, who is experiencing the ecstasy of being an instrument of Krishna's mercy. Now, who is experiencing the ecstasy of Krishna's presence everywhere in this world. And this brings us to the idea of why achintya is important in our philosophy. Because that this tiny living entity remains a tiny living entity without transgressing his or her or the soul's natural identity. That the material energy retains, even though being non-different to the Lord, eternally retains its individuality without transgressing its realm, is the result of Krishna's achintya Shakti. And inconceivably, although everything is one, by Krishna's inconceivable potency, it is also different. And so therefore Srila Prabhupada says, the devotee is fully aware that he is one with the Absolute, and at the same time in the eternal position of servant to the Absolute. And this simultaneous conception of Bheda and Abheda, inconceivably so, is the hallmark of what defines all of reality. That's Satyam or Vedyam Vastavam. In the material conception, one falsely thinks himself the Lord of all he surveys, and therefore is always troubled by the threefold miseries of life. But as soon as one comes to know his transcendental position as transcendental servant, he at once becomes free from all miseries. As long as the living entity is trying to master material nature, there's no possibility of his becoming servant of the Supreme. Service to the Lord is rendered in pure consciousness of one's spiritual identity. So do you remember the section we discussed from the Nectar of Devotion, where Srila Prabhupada was quoting or explaining the meaning of Sarvapadi Vinirmuktam Tatparatvena Nirmalam? That's the same point Srila Prabhupada is making. When one has this proper understanding that I am one and different from the Lord. I am not separate from Krishna, but I'm his eternal servant. If one very clearly has this correct understanding, pure devotional service becomes as natural as breathing air, or as natural as a service that a mother renders to the child. So that's why Srila Prabhupada is saying this. Service to the Lord is rendered in pure consciousness of one's spiritual identity. And therefore, this idea of Vedyam Vastavam Atra Vastu Shivadam, it is understanding this Vastavam Vastu, this underlying truth behind all of reality. It uproots all of our miseries. We have the correct idea of who we are. We no longer struggle with the idea that we are different. We have to struggle alone in this world. And Shivadam, it brings rise to the most auspicious circumstance where our eternal nature completely blossoms in service to Krishna. So that's what Srila Prabhupada is explaining here. Shivadam tapatrayan mulanam. By service, one is immediately freed from material encumbrances. Over and above this, now Srila Prabhupada is going to explain Srimad Bhagavatam Mahamuni Krite. Over and above this, Srimad Bhagvatam is a personal commentation on the Vedanta Sutra by Srila Vyasadeva. Now, I don't know if commentation is an actual word or not, but Srila Prabhupada's rendition of English words is very sweet. It's a personal commentation on the Vedanta Sutra by Sri Vyasadeva. Is it an actual English word? Commentation?
No.
No. Okay. On the Vedanta Sutra by Sri Vyasadeva. It was written in the maturity of his spiritual life, the Srimad Bhagavatam Mahamuni Krite. So that's what Srila Prabhupada is explaining. Through the mercy of Narada. Sri Vyasadeva is the authorized incarnation of Narayana. Therefore, he's called Mahamuni, the personality of Godhead. Therefore, Prabhupada says, he's Mahamuni. He is Narayan himself, who has come as a Shakti Avesh avatar, as Srila Vyasadeva. Therefore, there is no question as to his authority. And this is why we call the asana that we sit on Vyasa asana. It is stemming from the authority of Srila Vyasadeva. And we say Vyasa Puja. So when we say Vyasa Puja, we are celebrating the spiritual master who's a representative of Srila Vyasadeva, who is Narayan or Krishna himself. And so is the repository of perfect knowledge. And we will see that this lineation is also the reason why the Goswamis go to Sutta Goswami. So we will cover this, but just as reference, if you can go to text 7 of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So it's on page 65 of my copy of Srimad Bhagavatam. The sages say, Yani Veda Vidam Shreshto. I'll just give everybody a minute to find this reference.
Page 62 on this.
Okay.
Sorry, Prabhu, verse number?
It's 117.
Sorry, thank you, Prabhu.
So here it is said, Yani Veda Vidam Shreshto. So Veda Vidam means the knower of the Veda, Shreshto, Bhagavan Bhadarayana. So here the Shaunaka is saying that, O Sutta Goswami, you know that ultimate knower of the Vedas, who's Bhagavan Narayana Bhadarayana Vyasadeva. Anyecha Munaya Sutta Paravara Vido Vidu. And you know others. Anye, who, like Sukadev Goswami, like Narada, who also similarly, like Vyasadeva, know para avara, who know both aspects of life, how to manage material life, and ultimately what transcendental reality is. And then text 8, Vetatvam saumya tat sarvam tatvatas tad anugrahat. By their mercy, you, O Sutta Goswami, are their confidential servant, because you are very gentle in nature. You are snigdhasya, you're very affectionate to your spiritual masters. And so therefore, because you are a confidential servant of personalities like Srila Vyasadeva, Guruvo Guhyam Apiyuta, they have given you the deepest secrets among all the scriptures. So this connection to Srila Vyasadeva is what we celebrate in Vyas Puja, that the spiritual master is the embodiment of the deepest secrets of transcendental knowledge that have been revealed by Srila Vyasadeva and that have been handed down like a ripened mango from branch to branch of the tree of the Vedas, and finally over to us. Therefore, Prabhupada says, going back to the purport in text number 2, therefore, there is no question as to his authority. He is the author of all other Vedic literatures. Yet, Srila Vyasadeva himself, he himself recommends the study of Srimad Bhagvatam above all others. So Srila Vyasadeva is compiling this verse, and he's saying, because Srimad Bhagavatam is both eternal, but it's also his personal recommendation. So he's saying, Srimad Bhagavate Mahamuni Krite Kim va parer. What is the use of anything else? So Srila Vyasadeva himself is saying, why do you need to read anything else? In other Puranas, there are different methods set forth by which one can worship the demigods. But in the Bhagavatam, only the Supreme Lord is mentioned. So for reference, in the Vishnu Purana, in the 5th canto of the Vishnu Purana, there is a section, I don't remember how many chapters it is, but it's a small number of chapters devoted to describing the pastimes of Krishna. It's not very extensive. But in the Srimad Bhagavatam, the 10th canto occupies 1/3 of the verses across the Srimad Bhagavatam. So by this, you can understand the predominance that Srimad Bhagavatam gives to the pastimes of Krishna. And everywhere, regardless of whether it's describing Krishna's pastimes in relationship to the material world, in relationship to the devotees in the material world, it only speaks of Krishna. The Supreme Lord is the total body, and the demigods are the different parts of that body. Consequently, by worshipping the Supreme Lord, one does not need to worship the demigods. Now, Srila Prabhupada is going to describe the last line, Sadhyo Riddhi Avaruddhyate, because it is characteristic of the Srimad Bhagavatam that it is able to capture Krishna and place him in a devotee's heart. And because the only way to capture Krishna is through devotional service, it is very clear that Srimad Bhagavatam, even the desire to hear Srimad Bhagavatam constitutes devotional service. It is also very clear that the Srimad Bhagavatam from beginning through to end can only be talking about pure devotional service. Otherwise, there's nothing else of this material world that is transcendental enough to capture the Supreme Lord, who is known as Ajita, the one who's not conquerable, who is known as, what's that phrase? Beyond the material senses. I forget the name, Adokshaja, who's known as Adokshaja, who's not captured by the material senses or by anything material. So Srila Prabhupada continues, the proper method for receiving this transcendental message is to hear it submissively. A challenging attitude cannot help one realize this message. So therefore, this word Prabhupada says, is shushrushu. One must be anxious to hear this transcendental message. The desire to sincerely hear is the first qualification. So we made this point that the Srimad Bhagavatam doesn't require faith. It asks for the desire to hear. And that's what Prabhupada is saying, shushrushu, that one simply has to have that desire to hear. Less fortunate persons. Now, Srila Prabhupada is explaining kritibi. Why is the phrase kritibi used? Because those who do not have bhakti sukriti do not have the desire to hear. Those who don't have devotional piety will never have the desire to hear. So therefore, kritibi shushrushubi. So they have devotional piety, and therefore they develop the desire to hear. Less fortunate persons are not at all interested in hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam. The process is simple, but the application is difficult. I think one time Shrutakirti Prabhu, he speaks of when he went to see Srila Prabhupada in his room, and Srila Prabhupada in his spare time was reading the Krishna book. And then Srila Prabhupada he said, isn't it so wonderful? And Shrutakirti Prabhu says, actually, I think Prabhupada told Shrutakirti Prabhu, have you ever seen an author reading their own books? No author reads their own books. Authors read someone else's books. But I'm reading this because I am not the author. It's Krishna who has written this. But Prabhupada was just relishing Krishna Katha. And this is the heart of what it means to be a devotee. Somebody who's very naturally filled with the mood of devotional service, for them hearing Srimad Bhagavatam is the easiest thing in the world. But this simple process becomes extremely complicated when our own desire to enjoy this world makes us feel like what we are hearing or what we are doing is enough. This is enough for me. I've got so much more to do. And that's okay. But as our devotional piety increases, shushrubis, our desire to hear Srimad Bhagavatam, exponentially goes up, to the point where, as in the next verse, muhur aho, muhur aho, just keep hearing. The greatest devotees, their life is Srimad Bhagavatam. The Prabhupada explains, unfortunate people find enough time to hear idle social, political conversations, but when invited to attend a meeting of devotees to hear Srimad Bhagavatam, they suddenly become reluctant. Sometimes professional readers of the Bhagavatam immediately plunge into the confidential topics of the pastimes of the Supreme Lord, which they seemingly interpret as sex literature. Srimad Bhagavatam is meant to be heard from the beginning. Those who are fit to assimilate this work are mentioned in this shloka. Kritibis, Prabhupada is saying, one becomes qualified to hear Srimad Bhagavatam after many pious deeds. The intelligent person with thoughtful discretion can be assured by the great sage Vyasadeva that he can realize the Supreme Personality directly. Sadhyo Riddhi Avarudyate. That's the phrase. He can be assured by the great sage Vyasadeva that he can realize the Supreme Personality directly by hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. Without undergoing the different stages of realization set forth in the Vedas, one can be lifted immediately to the position of Paramahamsa simply by agreeing to receive its message. Because the essence of being a Paramahamsa is to have Krishna in the heart and to learn to see Krishna as the underlying substance behind all of reality. And that's the gift of Srimad Bhagavatam. Okay. We'll take quickly 2 minutes of any questions that anybody has.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna. Mother.
It's mentioned over here, we don't have the taste to hear Srimad Bhagavatam, and at certain period of time, if given a choice, like example, news and Srimad Bhagavatam, then why our tendency is there to just to listen to the news or other mundane things rather than Srimad Bhagavatam, or discussion about the
What
Krishna.
it mentioned is that not that we don't have the desire, that our desire to hear is in proportion to our devotional piety. Therefore, in the second chapter of the first canto, it is mentioned, Shushusho Shradadhanasya Vasudeva Kataruchi Syan Mahat Sevaya Vipra Punya Tirtha Nishevanat. That by serving the great souls and getting their blessings, one develops the desire to hear Srimad Bhagavatam. One develops the desire to hear about Krishna. This was the example of Narada also, that in association with the four Bhakti Vedantas, his desire to hear Srimad Bhagavatam increased substantially. So the Srimad Bhagavatam is not suggesting, it's not trying to delineate those who hear, those who have the desire to hear, those who don't have the desire to hear. What it points out is Prithibi Shushrushabis, that those who, to the proportion of one's devotional piety, one will have the desire to hear. And the manner in which one can develop the devotional piety is to serve the great Vaishnavas, or to serve Vaishnavas in general. Any other questions? Okay, let's go on to purport for text number 3. So Prabhupada says, so in the two previous shlokas, it has been definitely proved that the Srimad Bhagavatam is a sublime literature which surpasses all other Vedic literatures due to its transcendental qualities. It is transcendental to all mundane activities and mundane knowledge. So Prabhupada is, again, remember there was that section which spoke of Srimad Bhagavatam being superior to Karma Kanda, Upasana Kanda, and also superior to Jnana Kanda. So that's what Srila Prabhupada is referencing. Because it's superior to the mood of envy that pervades Karma Kanda and Upasana Kanda, it is also superior in mitigating material existence in comparison to Jnana Kanda. In this shloka, it is stated that Srimad Bhagavatam is not only a superior literature, but is the ripened fruit of all Vedic literatures. In other words, it is the cream of all Vedic knowledge. And so Prabhupada explains the so what of this. Considering all this, patient and submissive hearing is definitely essential. With great respect and attention, one should receive the message and lessons imparted by the Srimad Bhagavatam. So the previous verse described the greatness of Srimad Bhagavatam, which not only is it transcendental to Karma Kanda and Upasana Kanda and Jnana Kanda literatures, not only was it compiled by Srila Vyasadeva, which is the first two lines, and third line, not only was it compiled by Srila Vyasadeva, who's Narayana himself in his complete maturity, but its ultimate fruit is that it's able to capture Krishna and place it in one's heart. So this is Srimad Bhagavatam's own glorification of its supreme majesty. Now, in this particular verse, Srimad Bhagavatam's nature of being sweetness personified is being described, the ripened fruit of all Vedic literatures, that which is completely delectable, which is completely tasty. So Srila Prabhupada explains, the Vedas are compared to a desire tree because they contain all things knowable by man. They deal with mundane necessities as well as spiritual realization. Above and beyond all this are specific directions for spiritual realization. Regulated knowledge involves a gradual raising of the living entity to the spiritual platform. And so this is an explanation of Nigama Kalpataror Galitam Phalam. And the highest spiritual realization is knowledge that the personality of Godhead is a reservoir of all spiritual tastes or rasas. The first verse of the Nectar of Devotion is Akila Rasamrita Murti, that Krishna is described as that personified form of all rasas. So Srimad Bhagavatam is Rasa Shastra because its topic is entirely Krishna. By reading Srimad Bhagavatam, one comes directly into contact with Krishna. By associating with Srimad Bhagavatam, which is Krishna personified, which is an incarnation of Krishna, one comes in contact with Krishna directly. So what Srila Prabhupada is saying is the Vedas are like a desire tree, but the purpose of the Vedas, Vedescha sarve aham eva vedya, that the purpose of the Vedas is Krishna. And so therefore the Srimad Bhagavatam being Krishna personified, giving one direct association with Krishna, gives one access to Krishna, who is that unlimited reservoir of all taste. And therefore Srimad Bhagavatam is called Galitam Phalam and Rasam. These are the two phrases used to describe Srimad Bhagavatam here. Every living entity beginning from Brahma, the firstborn living being within the material world down to the insignificant ant, desires to relish some sort of taste from sense perceptions. These sensual pleasures are technically called rasas. Next paragraph. The sum total of all these rasas is called affection or love. Primarily, such signs of love are manifested in adoration, service, etc. When so Prabhupada is explaining the 5 primary and 7 secondary rasas. The rasas, look further down, are exchanged between members of the same species. But as far as spirit souls are concerned, they are one qualitatively with the Supreme Lord. Therefore, the rasas were originally exchanged between the spiritual living entity and the spiritual whole, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The spiritual exchange or rasa is fully exhibited in spiritual existence between the living entity and the Supreme Lord. So therefore, the implication being that the Srimad Bhagavatam is that literature which fully describes a relationship with that embodiment of all rasas. And that's the taste that one experiences in Srimad Bhagavatam. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is therefore described in the Shruti mantras, Vedic mantras, as the fountainhead of all rasas. So this is that famous verse, Raso Vaisaha. It comes in the Taittiriya Upanishad in the 2nd section called Anandavali. But there Krishna is described as Raso Vaisaha, who is the essence of all rasa. And it says, Rasam hi evayam ananda labati. Only by obtaining him can one obtain any taste in this world. If he were not there, what would how can anyone else live? These Shruti mantras indicate that every living being has its constitutional position, which is endowed with a particular type of rasa to be exchanged with the personality of Godhead. In the liberated condition, only this primary rasa is experienced in full. In material existence, the rasa is experienced in a perverted form, which is temporary. Therefore, next paragraph, one who attains full knowledge of these different rasas, which are the basic principles of activities, can understand the false representations of the original rasas, which are reflected in the material world. The learned scholar seeks to relish the real rasa in the spiritual form. In the beginning, he desires to become one with the Supreme. Thus, less intelligent transcendentalists cannot go beyond this conception of becoming one with the spirit whole, without knowing of the different rasas. In this shloka, it is definitely stated that spiritual rasa, which is relished even in the liberated stage, alayam, can be experienced in the literature of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, one experiences that Akila Rasamrita Murti, that personification of all rasas, and one experiences what it's like for a living entity exchanging these eternal mellows of relationship with that absolute truth. By submissively hearing this transcendental literature, one can attain the full pleasure of his heart's desire. But one must be very careful to hear the message from the right source. Srimad Bhagavatam is exactly received from the right source. So what Srila Prabhupada is explaining here is Sukha Mukhad. When Prabhupada is saying it has to be received from the right source, Prabhupada is saying it's not that Srimad Bhagavatam is just, just something, it's just a literature, it's like a book, you just take it and then you just read it. But if it's received from the right source, therefore it says Galitam Phalam. It is handed down from the highest tree systematically. It comes through Sukadev Goswami, who by cutting the fruit opens out the mellows from Srimad Bhagavatam and allows it to flood our hearts. But then it is handed down gently in parampara. That's what Srila Prabhupada is explaining. It was brought by Narada Muni from the spiritual world and given to his disciple Shri Vyasadeva. So technically it was given by Narayan from the spiritual world to Brahma and Brahma to Narada. But it was brought by Narada from the spiritual world through the parampara and given to his disciple Shri Vyasadeva. The latter in turn delivered the message to his son Srila Sukadev Goswami, and Srila Sukadev Goswami delivered the message to Maharaj Parikshit just 7 days before the king's death. Srila Sukadev Goswami was a liberated soul from his very birth. But Srila Sukadev Goswami, due to his being a perfectly liberated soul, did not have to undergo an evolutionary process for spiritual realization. Yet, despite his being a completely liberated soul situated in the transcendental position above the three material modes, he was attracted to this transcendental rasa of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is adored by liberated souls who sing Vedic hymns. You know which verse that is from the Rig Veda? Tad Vishnu, Om Tad Vishnu Paramam Padam Sada Pashyanti Surya. That's that verse. And also, Sarve Veda Yat Padam Amananti. The Supreme Lord's pastimes are more attractive to liberated souls than to mundane people. Alayam. He is of necessity not impersonal, because it is only possible to carry on transcendental rasa with a person. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, the transcendental pastimes of the Lord are narrated, and the narration is systematically depicted by Srila Sukadev Goswami. Thus, the subject matter is appealing to all classes of persons. So this is an explanation of Alayam, including those who seek liberation and those who seek to become one with the Supreme Whole. So for those who are seeking liberation, up to the stage of liberation. In Sanskrit, the parrot is known as shuka. When a ripened fruit is cut by the red beaks of such birds, its sweet flavor is enhanced. The Vedic fruit, which is mature and ripe in knowledge, is spoken through the lips of Srila Sukadev Goswami, who is compared to the parrot, not for his ability to recite the Srimad Bhagavatam exactly as he heard from his learned father, but for his ability to present the work in a manner that would appeal to all classes of men. So even though Srimad Bhagavatam is an eternal literature, when it comes to this lotus mouth of Srila Sukadev Goswami, it takes on special character. It reveals special mellows, as much as when a great Vaishnava worships the deity of the Lord, by his love for the deity and the way he dresses the deity, the way he worships the deity, the sweetness, the beauty of the deities is further revealed, even though the deities are the same, Radha Gopinath. Similarly, the Srimad Bhagavatam, when it is spoken by a great personality like Srila Sukadev Goswami, its sweetness and beauty are still more deeply revealed, even though it's the same Srimad Bhagavatam. And similarly, when it is presented by Srila Prabhupada and our exalted predecessors, its sweetness is increasingly revealed. The subject matter is so presented through the lips of Srila Sukadev Goswami that any sincere listener who hears submissively can at once relish transcendental tastes which are distinct from the perverted tastes of the material world. This ripened fruit is not dropped all of a sudden from the highest planet of Krishna Loka. Rather, it has come down carefully through the chain of disciplic succession without change or disturbance. Towards the end, one should conclude, therefore, that the serious student of the rasa should receive the message of Bhagavatam in the chain of disciplic succession from Srila Sukadev Goswami, who describes the Bhagavatam from its very beginning, and not whimsically to satisfy the mundaner who has very little knowledge in transcendental science. Srimad Bhagavatam is so carefully presented that a sincere and serious person can at once enjoy the ripened fruit of Vedic knowledge simply by drinking the nectarian juice through the mouth of Sukadev Goswami or his bona fide representative. So Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur would emphasize this point so very often. In almost all of his classes, at least recorded classes that we have today, what you see is that he defines Maya in a very unique way. He says Maya means miyate anaya iti Maya, which means that anything that you can measure is called Maya. You see a plate of ice cream or lasagna, you size it up with your senses. Is it tasty? Is it not tasty? Can I enjoy it? Will I not enjoy it? You size it up. You see a person, you measure them up. Are they pretty? Are they handsome? Are they smart? Can they fulfill my purpose? You size a person up. So this automatic tendency of the mind to measure everything in existence is a materialistic tendency. And when we hear Krishna's pastimes, we apply the same tendency to measure the Lord, that the Lord is like this, he must be feeling like this, he is like this. And then Srila Prabhupada presents a name of Krishna as is defined by Srila Jiva Goswami in the Sandarbhas. And Srila Prabhupada used to quote this definition very often. He says, Krishna is known as Adokshaja, that personality who reserves the right to not be visible, not be present before fools. And so Srila Bhaktisiddhanta used to say that that transcendental autocrat can only make himself known by his own mercy. It is not possible for somebody who's trying to measure this to just pluck, the essence and just try to, figure it out on their own, try to put their intelligence and understand. So what Srila Prabhupada is saying is the Srimad Bhagavatam is presented in such a way that it purifies the mind. It helps us understand, our intelligence understand, that through all of existence, there's nothing but Krishna. And at the same time, it causes the intelligence to understand that I am incapable of understanding Krishna. The simultaneous appreciation by the intelligence that Krishna is everything, which causes one to surrender, and the acknowledgement of defeat by the intelligence in understanding Krishna is the combination required in order to take shelter of Krishna and understand his actual transcendental nature. And the Srimad Bhagavatam, through its pages, will teach us this. To understand this point, if you have Bhagavad Gita open in front of you, if you look at 7.2, 7.19, 9.5, and 10.7, these four verses present this idea. Because in 10.7, Krishna says that one who knows all of my opulences, that I am everything in this world, yet who understands my mystic powers as being completely separate from everything, saha avikalpena yogena yujite natra samshayaha. He completely takes shelter of me, understanding my transcendental nature, and engages in my devotional service without any doubt. We'll describe this a little bit more fully in the next class, but reading Srila Prabhupada's purports, they're so relishable and so incredibly sweet. And Srila Prabhupada has so wonderfully brought out the essence, not just the essence, but a considerable amount of detail that explains these verses. So thank you so much for your time. I will end the class here. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki, Jai Srila Prabhupada ki,
Yeah.
Jai Nitai Gaur Premanande.
Hari.
Let's stay on for another 5-10 minutes if devotees have any questions. Otherwise, thank you so much for taking your valuable time to be here.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Abhishek,
Prabhu ki jai.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Jai.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare
Thank you,
Krishna.
everyone.
Our
Just
Hare
one second. Let those who need to leave, let
Thank
them.
you.
Okay. Sorry, who was
Yeah,
saying?
Prabhu, you said it's a ripened mango, juice ready to eat or drink. Even Lal Govindji had mentioned this in his Katha. So my question is like, even if you just recite Srimad Bhagavatam, you just read through, and if you still don't understand, still it purifies you. That is what it means.
Sorry, which phrase are you quoting here?
No, this text 3, we were discussing about, ripen.
No, not really. The Srimad Bhagavatam is written to teach us the science of the absolute truth. Therefore, it says, Vedyam Vastavam Atra Vastu Shivatam. By understanding that substance, which is the actual substance in all of reality, jo vastavikta mein vastu hai, understanding that, tapatrayan molanam. Because it's by understanding vastavikta vastu that that pure devotional service becomes completely natural. So understanding is actually quite important.
Okay.
If you look at one of the 4 obstacles to chanting Krishna's names that become offenses in the chanting of Krishna's names, one of them is called Tattva Vibhrama, a lack of proper understanding of the truth, of the absolute truth. So correct understanding is very much a necessity in order, and it doesn't mean that one has to become a philosopher, but through one way or the other, one has to understand Krishna as being the absolute truth, and that we are a non-different but insignificant separate part of Krishna. The understanding this is actually quite essential.
But the understanding makes, like, it's easy to understand. That is what it means. Like, like ready-made food or something, like, ripened food.
No, ripened fruit means that it is the fully matured message. It is not.
Okay.
It is not like there's something more to be said after this. It is not, for example, when you have, half prepared lasagna, not ready to eat, or if you eat it, you will not fully get the nutrition that you need. So the Srimad Bhagavatam is a fully ripened fruit. There's no further preparation that is required. This is the final product. There's nothing that is superior to this. That's the understanding.
I'm just thinking in that way. So what is other literature which needs to be, like example of other opposite to Srimad Bhagavatam?
Everything else.
Okay. All the Vedas.
Well, see, the Srimad Bhagavatam gives you the essential meaning of the Vedas. But if you compare it to other literatures like Mahabharata or other Puranas, the message is not as clear. So you still need to work to extract the essence. Whereas in Srimad Bhagavatam, you don't.
Okay. Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Sanjali Mataji?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Before I was talking, I don't think anyone could hear me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Probably it's such a basic question though. Like when we say we are one with God, like does that mean like we are same in quality? That's what we mean? Or is there more?
It's not just that. The idea is that there's nothing in existence which does not indicate Krishna. So, for example, to give you an example of a demigod, when you say Ganesh, you are not actually saying Ganesh. You are actually referencing Krishna, whose potency of removing obstacles is manifest as that deity. Similarly, when you're speaking of a particular person, you are not so much just referencing that person in isolation. You're referencing that person as being a particle in a ray of light that emanates from Krishna's body. Therefore, we also say that when you're offering obeisances to somebody, you're offering obeisances to Krishna within their heart. When you abuse, for example, this tin pot car, I hate this, it's, breaking down on me. It is quite illusory to think that you're not dealing with Krishna and his energies. It is this idea that there's nothing in existence which is separate from Krishna. It is this idea that foundationally, everything ultimately references or directly indicates Krishna. And the example that is given is just like when you say, I'm feeling warm because of fire. You can say that the heat is making me warm, but you're not actually talking about the heat. You're saying the fire made me warm, right? The light is helping me read, but it's not the light, it's the fire that is helping you read. So when you use the terms the heat or the light, you're actually referencing the fire. But you're not referencing, because if the fire was present there, whatever you're reading would burn, you would burn too. So you're actually referencing the fire as represented by its potency of heat and light. So whenever you are denoting anything, you are actually denoting Krishna as manifest as his energies. That's the specific meaning of the phrase absolute truth, or satyam, or vedyam vastavam vastu.
Is it in the same way that we are not separate from God? Like that's what it means?
Yeah.
Okay.
We're not separate from God.
But because we are a servant of God, so that way we are different as well. So
Yeah.
okay.
Our swarupa is always to be Anu, whereas, and Prabhu would always say this, our swarupa is to be Anu, the Lord's swarupa is to be Vibhu. We are Anu Chaitanya, Krishna's Vibhu Chaitanya. We are eternally meant to serve, and Krishna's eternal nature is to receive that service. So the distinction is always there. But at the same time, the jiva can never be called a separate part of Krishna. You are a part, but a parcel of Krishna. And so this is what is meant by that phrase, Tattvam Asi, or Neha Nanasti Kinchana, Sarvam Kalav Idam Brahma. In all of the Upanishads, there are many statements denoting that everything is actually one, that there's no difference between anything. And there are statements in the scriptures, like in the Svetasvatara Upanishad, Bhokta Bhogyam Preritam Chamatva, that denote differences between everything. And they're both simultaneously true. So the reconciliation between the two is that everything in existence only denotes the Supreme Lord, but as his potency. It eternally remains his potency. It eternally remains his attribute, but it is a non-separate part of him and can only ultimately denote him because its existence is founded on him.
Thank you, Prabhu. Just an add-up question to the same one.
But the question that you've actually asked, it goes to the, if it feels like this idea is complicated, it is because it is the essential purport of all the Vedic mantras. So when somebody studies the Vedas and tries to reconcile all of these statements, what comes out is this understanding. There is a work by Ramanuja called Vedartha Sangraha. It was delivered in the form of a lecture to Lord Balaji at Tirumala Hills. And across about 144 paragraphs, Ramanuja brings forth this connecting thread through all of the Vedic mantras to establish this very point. And he gives arguments to refute other contrary conceptions. But this is, so the even term Vedartha Sangraha, Sangraha means to bring together the conclusion of the meaning of the Vedas. And this is that idea. And so it takes a while to actually kind of digest it. But it is the understanding that Srimad Bhagavatam brings forth. And it is the understanding that if one has very clear, then pure devotional service becomes very simple and easy.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Mataji.
And Prabhuji, monist, like monist and dualist, which we were talking in the second verse. So like how, like they are just seeing the energy as the main cause, like they are not seeing the creator, or like I just didn't understand like how they are
The dualists?
interpreting. Yeah.
The dualists don't recognize one common source of everything. They see that elements are eternally separate from one another with their own inherent properties. So, for example, water eternally exists as a particle of water in the Vaisheshika philosophy with its own properties. And then earth exists as its own particle with its own properties. And then some unseen force causes the combination of the two, and you get whatever you get. This is the idea of the dualists. So it is this idea that you have eternally existent parts. So in old science, when they said that the ultimate indivisible particle is the atom, it's the same idea, that you have all of these atoms that combine together to get something. But then science evolved from there to say that all of these elements have one common source. And they describe how each of these elements ultimately come from one underlying substance. It could be start with an hydrogen atom, you combine the two, you get helium, you fuse some other elements together, you get other elements that form. So science has evolved in its conception, but the dualists basically explain that these elements exist eternally with their own inherent nature or properties. That's what they explain. But it stands in contrary to what Vedanta says. So in Sankhya, for example, for the first time, so in the 6 philosophies, you have Vaisheshika and Nyaya are actually twin philosophies, like brother and sister philosophies. Nyaya adopts the foundation of Vaisheshika, that all of these elements are separate, and by some unseen force, they're brought together. But then Sankhya and Yoga are actually also allied philosophies. So in Sankhya, for the first time, you have this idea that from some primordial substance like Pradhan, Mahat Tattva evolves, which evolves into Ahankara, which evolves into different elements. And then, but Sankhya doesn't accept the presence of God. It says that you have Prakriti and Purusha, and then when Purusha somehow comes in contact with Prakriti, then consciousness evolves. And the combination of Purusha with Prakriti causes the evolution of these elements. And then yoga, it introduces this idea of Ishvara. So therefore, sometimes yoga is called the Sa Ishvara Sankhya. But Nyaya and Vaisheshika are allied philosophies, and Yoga and Sankhya are allied philosophies. But the Vedanta Sutra, in the Vedanta philosophy, this foundational idea that you have an absolute truth, who's conscious, who's sentient, who is omnipotent, omnipresent, and from him evolves all of reality, that is a Vedanta contribution. And so therefore you have the importance of the Brahma Sutras. And that's why when you start with the phrase, Atato Brahma Jigyasa, let us inquire into, now that you've finished with everything else in existence, let's inquire into that Brahma, who is the absolute truth. And how is that Brahma defined? Janmadi Asya Yataha, that one underlying substance from which all of reality evolves. So very quickly from the very beginning, even though we take this phrase, for granted. Through this phrase, Janmadi Asiyataha, the Vedanta establishes its philosophical position from the very beginning that the absolute truth is one without second, and from him alone, everything, he expands himself as everything in this world. And this is foundationally an idea in Vedanta. And Srimad Bhagavatam elaborates or fully brings out this conception. So to take it one step further, when Srila Prabhupada says the dual or non-dual, or those philosophers who say one, those who follow Shankara's philosophy, they only give importance to those mantras of the Vedas that say that everything is non-different. So mantras like Ekam Eva Dvitiyam, Neha Nanasti Kinchana, Tattvamasi, Pragyanam Brahma, Aham Brahmasmi. So these are the phrases that they give importance to, and they disregard other phrases. The dualists are those who give far more importance to those phrases that show difference. Bhokta bhogyam preritam chamatva. And they disregard or give secondary importance to phrases like neha nanasti kinchana, aham brahmasmi, etc. And Ramanuja was the one who actually brought those ideas together and explained his philosophy as Vishishtadvaita. Lord Chaitanya's philosophy is fundamentally almost identical to Ramanuja's presentation. And so in Ramanuja's presentation and Lord Chaitanya's presentation, there's an equal weight given to both statements of scriptures, that everything is non-different and at the same time everything is different. And Srila Vyasadeva explains the unification of these philosophies in the Vedanta Sutra. And therefore, when Srila Prabhupada says, when one understands this conception, he sees all philosophies of oneness and difference as being imperfect. And that's what Srila Prabhupada means. So, like Manibhushan Mataji asked a question earlier about where one can understand the Shatsandarbhas, and I think misunderstanding the question and given an answer that the Shatsandarbhas are hard to access, because understanding this requires an understanding of the six philosophies. Understanding this foundational idea requires some understanding of what the Vedanta Sutra says and what its foundational contribution was, how the commentaries on the Vedanta Sutra have presented, like Shankara's, one biased perspective based on giving overimportance to certain Vedic mantras. But how Lord Chaitanya's presentation perfectly harmonizes both mantras in the Vedanta Sutra. So in Jiva Goswami's Sandarbha presentation, it's not esoteric, but it requires a grounding in Vedic knowledge or Vedantic studies. And that's what makes it a little difficult to access. But the same ideas Srila Prabhupada presents very elaborately in the pages of Srimad Bhagavatam, as we saw in his purports. And as we keep studying Srimad Bhagavatam, so when we study creation in the second canto, when we study maintenance in the fifth canto, when we study destruction in the 12th canto, you will see these ideas that Srimad Bhagavatam presents. And this is the idea that it's teaching us or encouraging us to understand.
Thank you.
Abhishek, Prabhu, can I just ask one last question, please, before you disappear? I'm sorry.
Sure.
So does that sum up the duality versus non-duality argument? Is that what it is?
Yep.
Okay, that's really okay. Thank you.
I'll just pause. I'll stop the recording.